May we then move on, please, to item 10, where we have feedback from 4 of our committees, and start with the Audit Committee. Ed.
Thank you, Chairman. The Audit Committee meets pretty regularly. It has a full programme of work, as you can see from the minutes of the last meeting. The points that I want to draw to the Board's attention are firstly the construct of an issues list, which I regard as a principal way of identifying those high-risk and urgent matters which need to be brought to the Board's attention, and where management are focused on essentially executing against them in pretty short order. I hope that list does not grow and grow. I hope it's a dynamic list that has about half a dozen items on it, and items move off that list and new ones will inevitably come in through the course of time. And I hope that, again, the Board will focus and ask questions on that over time. The second one is just to reaffirm the Board assurance framework and its importance to driving risk management and risk assurance. Thirdly, to note that the internal auditors have now got a full programme of work. We appointed Deloitte a little while ago, and their work is progressing across a broad front and will be an essential piece of the assurance mechanisms to the Board. Fourthly, that whilst you went past the last set of accounts pretty fast, next year's set of accounts will be rather more complicated, in as much that it will include the consolidation of all of the CGs and the accountability for the 96.5 billion of funds. That is no small task. The planning needs to start now. It has started now. A number of dry runs will be needed, and it won't just be numbers, it will be governance statements and a whole host of things. So whilst it is only an annual report, I can assure you that doesn't happen without a great deal of effort from across the organisation. And just to highlight the risk that the cutover from the old system to the new system is still being worked through in terms of any liabilities that might come across that we are unaware of, and Paul will report on that probably later in the year once that's been worked through with the department. Other than that, happy to take questions.
Thank you. Naveed, anything to add? No. May we receive then the report from the Audit Committee? Thank you very much. Let's move then to the Commissioning Support Committee. Moira.
Malcolm, I don't think I've got anything to add to this fairly short summary, but Ros will be very happy to answer any questions that the Board has.
Right, well, I'm taking questions for Ros, but I don't see any. Ros, I think you're let off. Thank you very much, Moira, for the report. Paul, on Procurement Controls Committee.
I can keep this very short and just make the link to Kieran's point. This is the point at which the the arm's length body controls that you talk about meets the real world of our operation, and I suppose the operation of this committee is about the only thing that makes it possible to continue to do business. I think it holds the distinction of being the busiest board subcommittee in the sense that it meets weekly and has great excitement with cases coming through. Quite how sustainable that is in the long term, I think I would have to just put as a matter of some concern, because I suspect we are still seeing a build-up of cases rather than the full case load as we go through. So there, it comes back to your point, we do need to move forward from this, but I think to a large extent we're going to have to earn the autonomy through the way in which we manage these things, and then I think we will get slightly more release from some of these controls, and we are continuing on that front. But beyond putting on record what we've done, how many we've approved and how many we've had conditions around, etc., I don't think I have anything more to add to what's been said. We will add for future reports the financial value of the transactions we put through, because that clearly will be more helpful than just the number of items. But beyond that,
yes, no, that would be helpful. Thank you for that. Right, let me move on, please, to the Finance and Investment Committee. Moira.
Malcolm, again, not much to add to what's here. The committee has met twice and has another meeting planned very shortly. So again, judging how much work and how to get that right will be important, timeliness, etc. But hopefully the report gives the board brief summary of the work to date, and in this case Paul will be happy to answer any questions.
Well, I don't see any rushed question, Paul, on this. I think what we should just observe is that much of the board's work is done in committee, and has to be because of the volume of work that's flooding through. And to thank my fellow non-executive directors for the huge amount of time that they put into these committees and working very closely with the executive team. It's appropriate that at these full board meetings we note summaries of work that's been underway rather than rework the work of our committees. But it's an important part of the assurance of the business of the board as a whole that we do as we have just done. So thank you for those reports. I think we should now move on to item 11 on the agenda, which is the government consultation on the mandate. And I'll invite Bill to outline the paper, please.
Thank you, Chairman. The board will recall that the mandate is the way the government sets out its expectations for NHS England, and the first mandate was published last November, but only really came into operation as we did in April. So this refresh of the first mandate is pretty early in its life. But what we're bringing to the board today is a report that the government has started its consultation on refreshing the mandate. It published that on the 5th of July. I think the first point it's worth making is, of course, we haven't, as a board, felt that our ambitions should be constrained, if you like, just by the mandate. So in our business planning, I think we decided as a board that we should go significantly further in a whole set of areas. Particularly, I think we anticipated some of the work of the Francis review, and around areas of patient safety culture with Jane's lead on the 6 Cs. I think we made steps well beyond what was in the first mandate, and indeed in much of the area of transparency and public engagement likewise. And I think that's probably quite important for us to note. The mandate consultation document itself, I think I'd make just a couple of points. The first is that there are a whole set of proposed changes to objectives. Many of them in their own right perfectly good things, and indeed you get quite enthusiastic about a number of the individual aspirations. What I think we as a board will want to think about when we consider our response is whether they move in some cases into a world of beginning to prescribe more process than outcome. And of course, the way we've been established, the way the new health system is set up, is on the basis of setting really challenging aspirational outcomes, which then with the right degree of clinical leadership locally, the right sort of headroom for really strong partnerships to develop locally, those outcomes will be delivered and indeed exceeded through the best means available, which connect, really well with the people that are being served locally. So my first question would be, are we satisfied that that we can keep hold of that really important part of our mission, which is to achieve outcomes through developing the right relationships, giving the right degree of clinical freedom. The second point I just raised your attention, I think is around costs. Now, the government have been very straightforward in the mandate consultation by saying that a number of these proposals could carry additional cost, but they haven't at this stage been able to calculate what those costs might be. They do make the commitment that when they do that, they would then need to consider different priorities. And we think it's quite important that discipline of financial rigour, particularly in the financial environment we're working in, which is pretty tight, that we keep to that discipline, or else completely unintentionally we could find that we're putting unrealistic overloading some of the expectations on the service, which, as Barbara was saying earlier, and the report on performance can be running pretty hot at times. So those would be my two, if you like, cautionary questions, that the degree of outcomes focus and the right clinical leadership motivation out there, and keeping the discipline of costing. But with that, Chairman, welcome initial comments from the board, which then, of course, over the next few months, we would turn into a more formal response.
Well, thank you very much for that, Bill. I think it's worth reminding ourselves of the function of the mandate. It's a part of the constitutional relationship between the board and the government, which is established in the 2012 legislation as resting on three principal pillars. One is the Act of Parliament itself, which requires both the Secretary of State and ourselves to share responsibility for the promotion of a comprehensive national health service, which requires us both to respect the principles of autonomy and to drive continuous improvement. So there's the legislation. Then secondly, the NHS Constitution, because the legislation requires us to advance the principles of the NHS Constitution, and Barbara this morning has described to us how that is captured and how we do it, and how we measure our progress. And then the third aspect of the relationship is the mandate itself, and everybody at the board will recall that when we were consulted last year on the original mandate, we had, I think, a very constructive discussion with the department about how the mandate might observe those principles of autonomy and of liberating the NHS, which were, after all, the fundamental principles of the legislation. And they're principles which apply not only to us but also to the clinical commissioning groups. Our responsibility with them is not to impose requirements upon them, but to work closely with them and to facilitate them and to allow them to be as good as they possibly can be by aligning financial resource with clinical leadership and clinical judgment. And that to me captures what the model of the reformed NHS commissioning system involves. So I think it's rather important that as we carry forward further discussions with the department around the refresh to the mandate, that we continue to respect that legal set of relationships. And I would say to help the government to maintain its vision for the liberated NHS against all the other pressures that inevitably are on the government. And I think we need to work constructively with them on that front. With that in mind, I would suggest that this draft refresh of the mandate is exactly that. It's a draft, it's out for consultation. This is genuinely a work in progress and an area where we would look to, I think, work constructively with the government. If I have an overriding concern, it is that we risk the loss of clarity, and without clarity, accountability becomes blurred. It's absolutely essential that we, as a board, understand that we are legally responsible for reporting against the mandate. We have an obligation to comply with those aspects of it which are specified as requirements, and as to those which are specified as objectives, we have to seek to comply. So actually this is very serious, and your point about cost is absolutely critical in all of this, where we need accountability, transparency, and proper costing to understand how we would work. That point about cost is of course built into the legislation, so that the mandate itself, when it comes formally to be agreed, must contain a statement of the cost, so that it's transparent. What are the obligations which the government is transferring to the NHS England board, and what is the cost associated with them? So with all of that, I would hope that we can this morning consider the principles of the proposed update on the mandate, understanding that we are just 15 weeks into the operation of the first iteration of the mandate, and understand what it is that the government seeks to do to amend the mandate with effect from 1st of April next year, of what is, after all, a 2-year mandate established by them in the first instance. But I would hope that throughout all of this we can come to an agreement around the nature of the mandate, which allows us to continue to pursue our broad ambitions for the future of the NHS, and at the same time to meet the government's objectives, led by the Prime Minister and the Health Secretary, for the NHS, both through the short term and the medium term, but also, of course, into the longer term. So, on that basis, may I invite some comments on Bill's paper and on the draft refresh itself. Victor.
I think Bill's paper is very clear and very good, as I would wholeheartedly agree with your remarks, Chair. There is the question of the role of NHS England and the implications of the mandate refresh for our role. There's two items in particular. The item 70, I don't want to be too specific, but the reference to the collection of costs from overseas visitors, I think I'd welcome more clarity in the discussions that we have with the Secretary of State as to, first of all, the implications of that for our role, and the implications of that in public health terms, and in terms of our values, which are also clearly. So there are implications for our role, which I think we do need clarification on, actually, throughout this document. But it's worth. I'd also point of welcome, I guess. The item 27 specific reference to mental health and emergency crisis responses, which I would welcome as a general point. But again, we need to understand the implications for our role and our relationship with other bodies like the police and social services. So there's a lot of clarification to be done in moving forward in this document, and there are some significant implications for what NHS England is and what it should be doing.
Kieran, and then Nagi.
I'm a fan of the mandate document as it exists. I think I love the focus on the 5 domains. So when I was reading this, I was trying to think through, saying, do these suggestions drive the 5 domains and drive the outcomes? And they're, a bit like Bill said, there are 1 or 2 things there. I think, that's exciting, that could be fun. Really have an impact. But I guess my overriding feeling was that there was a risk that we were straying into the territory of how to do things. There's one phrase about, we'll work on CCG planning guidance with NHS England. That feels unstrategic and not outcome focused. And then a worry that some of the things we're saying is, and we'll also implement the recommendations of this report and put them in the mandate. So maybe it's back to your clarity point, Malcolm, but the thing I loved about the mandate originally was there was a minimal amount of complex how processy stuff around it. It was around 5 domains. I would be wanting us to go into the consultation and the debate around what's in the refresh, is saying anything which drives outcomes harder and sets higher expectations might be one thing. Anything which begins to dilute that relentless focus on outcomes, I would be pushing back on. Personal opinion.
Thank you. Nagi.
I would just echo a number of the comments that you made in your introduction about how one can deal with some of these issues where they're not very specific. So when we come back to being accountable against the mandate, specificity is very important. And I think it's very difficult to go out to consultation to the public without an indication of cost on things. So if one asks whether you'd like more of a certain type of service without any indication of how it's going to be funded, I think it's inevitable that people will generally say, yes, I would like more of that service because it's a good thing to have. I think not having the costings makes it very difficult. And on Victor's point about question mark about what is relevant to the role of NHS England, I think paragraph 58, which is about additional leadership being required, is one that I think does require clarification. It's very vague. It's hard to know what that means.
Thank you. Myra?
Malcolm, it's a question really. Obviously this is the first time, as with so many things, with a new organisation, a new system, this is the first time we're talking about a refresh of the mandate. And, you know, we're looking here, we're one party to the mandate, as it were, but we're looking here at a public consultation document. So I suppose my question is, at the end of this, well, do we not have a role in the consultation, in a sense we're the other side, or do we wait till the consultation comes to an end, the Department of Health takes a view about that consultation and comes back, and then there has to be some kind of negotiation, because it can't simply be in an imposition of the mandate, particularly around the point that people have made about costs and deprioritisation that's suggested here. And that all of that is quite a long timeline, it seems to me, again, in terms of the, you know, the commitment that they make in the consultation document about a stable, committed to providing constancy of purpose to enable the NHS plan to go ahead. It's you know, the sort of period of preparation, as it were, for an altered mandate isn't very long. So I'm just interested in Bill's view about that, what that process will be, because obviously we're also inventing a, you know, a system that presumably will be the future pattern, really, and it's, you know, it feels to me that it's very time consuming because, you know, we're one party to it, but we've got lots and lots of CCGs who have expectations of us, so it's quite tricky.
Would you like to respond to that?
Yes, well, see, the government is formally required to consult on the mandate just with us, of course, and this is part of their broader, I think it's a very healthy decision to have a wider engagement with all interested parties, but we would expect on the back of that then to have some formal engagement on the proposed changes to the mandate. You know, negotiation, requirement to agree, no, they're required to consult. But our experience last time was there were those who were very, very open and good discussions. So, you know, I go into it with, you know, with some confidence that the government will want to engage properly with us on this. I think your point about constancy of purpose is really well made. What we know is that in the existing mandate, many of the most important objectives around improving outcomes take a period of time to deliver, and they require us to retain our focus, to really work hard on the innovations that will help bring about, you know, a much better understanding, new ways to bring about improvements in care, the whole area of responsiveness to patients, which, you know, we're opening up through Jane and Tim's work. All of that requires real commitment over a period of time. And of course our business plan was setting that out for a 3-year period. So I really do hope that at the end of this, we will still be focusing, you know, as much of our efforts as possible on that mission to improve outcomes and tackle inequalities right the way across the country, and where we need to, you know, make some adjustments because it will better help us achieve that in our business planning process, reflecting any amendments to the mandate, then that's great. Anything that might risk diverting us or looking at, you know, different matters, I just don't think we'll sit with that absolute core mission to serve the public and patients by helping them improve outcomes and tackling and addressing inequalities where we see it.
Could I just say, I think an answer to Moira's first question is that consistent with our values and our transparency, we will reply in a formal way in the public domain to the consultation. We would expect, of course, our executive team to be in constant communication with the department, but I think it's right that the views that we've expressed around the table this morning are properly recorded and properly reflected. Ed?
Yeah, I think this goes quite well with the next item as well, because a proper financial evaluation of the outcome of this has not just one-year impacts, but multiple-year impacts. And it's not just a money thing, it's actually a capability and capacity thing as well. And where I've seen organisations fail is even if they try and do things more efficiently with money, it's the amount of intellectual capacity and time in the system that often becomes the break. So I think we need to evaluate both of those aspects as we respond to this.
Well, thank you. That's been a very valuable discussion. I see one of the functions of the mandate actually as being of communication. I mean, it is actually setting out in a formal document what the government's expectations are of the National Health Service to us as commissioners, but not just to us as commissioners, also to CCGs as commissioners and to the other arm's length bodies with whom we work in partnership across the system. There's a tendency which we may observe from time to time within the NHS to drown clear messages in extensive wording. And I think a very important part of this is to come back to a sense of absolute clarity as to what it is that the government is asking us to do. And that's not at all to dilute what is here, except in terms of volume, but much more to focus it and to concentrate it so that we're on the same page, we understand what our mutual expectations are. So with that in mind, may I ask the board to approve that way of going forward with our response to the mandate and assure the board that before any final response is signed off, it will be cleared by us either in formal meeting or more likely by correspondence between meetings. Are we content to do that? Good. Thank you very much. May we then move on to item 12 on the agenda, which is the outcome of the spending round. Apologies.
No, it's just, I just wondered whether we might take a short refreshment break. There's one I was hoping to have.
Well, I noticed that everybody was paying so much attention that I wouldn't take a refreshment break, but let me just get a sense of the weight of other business. It's not trivial. Shall we take... shall we bow to Lord Adabawali's request?
It's up to you. I can't cheat nature, sir.
Okay. We'll take 15.
Thank you very much.
Right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.